So a couple days ago, Joe Biden came out and delivered a response to the media hysteria over what's happening in Afghanistan. Now, I have to say, I was wavering there for a second on old Joe. I was 50-50. I was agnostic. I did not know what direction he was going to go in. Because when I tell you everybody was coming after him, I mean everybody. All of MSNBC, all of CNN, all of Fox News, the entire Republican establishment, most of the Democratic establishment. In fact, for a long time, I didn't see anybody who actually spoke out in favor of Biden on this front. Eventually, I did see Ilhan Omar come out and tweeted something in support of ending endless war, and there were a handful of others. But by and large, it was like unanimous across the board. All the elites were like, this is terrible, this is wrong, and the implication is, you shouldn't pull out of Afghanistan either at all, or you shouldn't have pulled out of Afghanistan in the way you did, which is, of course, the process hand-wringing, which is, it's easier said than done for you to nitpick after the fact. At the end of the day, even though I have my own criticisms, on the broader point, I think Biden is correct to pull out of Afghanistan. And in fact, I give him even more credit because I didn't think he would really do it. I thought that we'd be in a situation where he pulled a Trump and left 2,000 troops there, or 3,000 troops there. Now, he did send in 5,000 or 6,000 while Kabul was falling to the Taliban, but it was very clearly just to secure the airport to get out our people. So, in all seriousness, if I was in Joe Biden's shoes and the exact same set of facts was presented to me, I would do the exact same thing that Joe Biden did. I would say, yeah, well, we got to get out our people, so of course you got to secure the airport, you have to send in more troops. Are they going to stay there and fight the Taliban? It's over, son. It's Dunsky. The Taliban has taken Kabul. There is going to be no, we're going to stay there at just the airport and fight the Taliban, who now have control of Kabul, Kandahar, Jalalabad, and like every other area in Afghanistan. It's over. It's done. There is no, these actually are not combat troops. These are troops to secure the airport and get our people out. So anyway, Joe Biden came out, gave a speech. I was watching, sort of cringing, wincing, like, oh, Joe, what are you going to say? What are you going to do? Well, I don't, turns out, no. He largely came through. Now, of course, since he came through, and I think made the correct points, yet again, everybody in the media is going after him viciously, and both party leadership structures are going after him viciously. So let me go ahead and show you a little bit of his speech here. It's a little bit long, but I'm showing you really important parts. Let's take a look and then I'll break it down.
We went to Afghanistan almost 20 years ago with clear goals. Get those who attacked us on September 11th, 2001, and make sure al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that. We severely degraded al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We never gave up the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and we got him. That was a decade ago. Our mission in Afghanistan was never supposed to have been nation building. It was never supposed to be creating a unified, centralized democracy. Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been, preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland. I've argued for many years that our mission should be narrowly focused on counterterrorism, not counterinsurgency or nation building. That's why I opposed the surge when it was proposed in 2009 when I was vice president. And that's why as president, I'm adamant that we focus on the threats we face today in 2021, not yesterday's threats. I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risks. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves. We spent over $1 trillion. We trained and equipped an Afghan military force was some 300,000 strong, incredibly well equipped, a force larger in size than the militaries of many of our NATO allies. We gave them every tool they could need. We paid their salaries, provided for the maintenance of their Air Force, something the Taliban doesn't have. Taliban does not have an Air Force. We provided close air support. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. What we could not provide them was the will to fight for that future. There's some very brave and capable Afghan special forces units and soldiers. But if Afghanistan is unable to mount any real resistance to the Taliban now, there is no chance that 1 year, 1 more year, 5 more years, or 20 more years of U.S. military boots on the ground would have made any difference. So I'm left again to ask of those who argue that we should stay, how many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when Afghan troops will not? How many more lives, American lives, is it worth? How many endless rows of headstones at Arlington National Cemetery? I'm clear on my answer. I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past. Mistake of staying and fighting indefinitely in a conflict that is not in the national interest of the United States, of doubling down on a civil war in a foreign country, of attempting to remake a country through the endless military deployments of U.S. forces. Those are the mistakes we cannot continue to repeat. I know there are concerns about why we did not begin evacuating Afghan civilians sooner. Part of the answer is some of the Afghans did not want to leave earlier, still hopeful for their country. And part of it because the Afghan government and its supporters discouraged us from organizing a mass exodus to avoid triggering, as they said, a crisis of confidence. American troops are performing this mission as professionally and as effectively as they always do, but it is not without risks. As we carry out this departure, we have made it clear to the Taliban, if they attack our personnel or disrupt our operation, the U.S. presence will be swift and the response will be swift and forceful. I will not pass this responsibility on to a fifth president. I will not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference. Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today and how we must move forward from here. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me. I made a commitment to the brave men and women who serve this nation that I wasn't going to ask them to continue to risk their lives in a military action that should have ended long ago. Our leaders did that in Vietnam when I got here as a young man. I will not do it in Afghanistan. I know my decision will be criticized, but I would rather take all that criticism than pass this decision on to another president of the United States, yet another one, a fifth one.
So there you have it. Let's run through a bunch of the stuff here, and then I'm going to tell you what I think really went on behind the scenes, which led us to the withdrawal going the exact way it did, and which led us to the Taliban taking over Kabul in lightning quick fashion. So he says, listen, the original reason we were told we're going is to get those who attacked us on 9/11 and to, well, basically get Osama bin Laden, and then they move the goalpost to get all of Al-Qaeda, whoever in Al-Qaeda happens to be in Afghanistan and is being protected by the Taliban. On both those fronts, mission accomplished. And I would say, correct, he's 100% right about that, but then you'd also have to ask, we achieved those goals as of 2011. Al-Qaeda was already decimated in Afghanistan, and we got Osama bin Laden in 2011 in Pakistan, not even in Afghanistan. So if he really believes the thing he's saying, then Biden was probably behind the scenes in favor of getting out of Afghanistan all the way back when he was vice president in Obama's first term. And it makes you wonder how many conversations they had behind the scenes where perhaps Biden was telling Obama, I think you should get out, and I think you should get out now. Because if he believes what he's saying, then he probably made that argument behind the scenes back then, and there's no reason to not think he means it because he's following through on it right now. Which then begs the question, well, honestly, how much of a cuck was Obama to the Pentagon and the generals and the deep state and our intelligence agencies if he had his vice president telling him, hey, we should probably get out skis, and he ended up not only keeping soldiers there, but doing the surge. And Biden points out, hey, I don't know how many of you guys remember this, but I was against the surge when we did the surge in Afghanistan. Yet again, another area I'm just 100% in agreement with Joe Biden. Then he goes on to say, we're not supposed to be nation building. Guys, I watched a number of documentaries on Afghanistan since the fall of Kabul, and without a doubt, we were nation building. And clearly, Biden is saying we shouldn't at any point have been nation building. So that was wrong-headed. And if you watch the Frontline documentary I watched called Obama's War, you'll get the sense that it's almost like cartoonishly and comically inept nation building, where like there's no way at any step that it was going to work, but we tried to do it anyway, which makes you think about what are the more ulterior motives and, you know, why are we really there and who's really pulling the strings and making the decisions. And then, of course, you get the uncomfortable answers about natural resources and the military-industrial complex and imperialism and geopolitics and trying to keep China and Russia at bay and all those things. But I digress from that point. You've heard me make that point 1,000 times over. He said, quote, I stand squarely behind my decision. That's sort of gangster Joe, with everybody and their mother coming after him vociferously. He's sticking his middle finger up to the establishment. He really is, man. You got to call balls and strikes, and this is me calling balls and strikes, and Joe Biden is doing something here that I think is genuinely brave. He said, quote, there's never a good time to withdraw U.S. troops. That's right. No matter when or where you're withdrawing troops, all of U.S. media, all of the Pentagon, all of the intelligence agencies, and the leadership of both parties are going to come after you. He's 100% right. He's also dead honest when he says, this did unfold more quickly than we anticipated. He said, and he's getting shit for this next thing. He said, Afghan leaders gave up. The military collapsed without trying to fight. So on this front, the point that a lot of people on the left are making is like, man, it's really shitty to sort of blame Afghans for what's going on here, when really the blame is squarely with the United States of America, because we shouldn't have invaded in the first place, and we shouldn't have occupied it, and we shouldn't have jacked the natural resources, and we shouldn't have micromanaged, and we shouldn't have been nation building, and so on and so forth. So I agree with that criticism, but I also think I would take away any value judgment, because I have no value judgment on the fact that a lot of them didn't fight, but I do think that what Biden is saying is pretty objective. When you have 300,000 soldiers and the opposition is only 75,000, you can beat them if you want to beat them. All you need is like the will, and you need, you know, minimal ability to strategize. Any mediocre general in such a situation could probably bring about victory. And we didn't get it. So I don't blame the people of Afghanistan who were maybe in the military and didn't fight, because if I was in that position, I wouldn't have fought either. I mean, it's effectively a fake country that we're propping up. It's a total house of cards. So I'm not blaming them, but I absolutely think that what Joe Biden is saying is true. And in terms of the leaders giving up, well, there's no doubt Ghani was out skis the second that he heard a Taliban fighter fart. He was gone. He's like, Tajikistan, what's up, dog? I'm coming. And we just learned today that he had $169 million in cash, US dollars, with him when he left. You're telling me that's not giving up? Not only is that giving up, it's exposing the fact it was a corrupt grift all along, and this guy is a puppet leader. So, I mean, again, he's getting crap for that, and I agree with some of the criticisms, but also, if you take away the idea that there's a value judgment there, then I think what Biden is saying is rather objective. You wouldn't have had the Afghanistan government collapse in like a week if there was more of a will. Now, one of the other counter arguments is actually Vice News was on the ground, and they were embedded with the elite Afghan special forces. And they were like, don't tell me these guys don't have the will to fight. They have the will to fight. To which I respond, you're 100% right. Those guys have the will to fight. But how many elite special forces are there? Out of the 300,000, there's only like 1,000 or 2,000 of them. So don't tell me that because 1,000 or 2,000 are good fighters and they have the will to fight and they're doing everything they can, and my heart genuinely bleeds for them, but don't tell me because there's like 1,000 or 2,000 of them that therefore the whole 300,000 military, which we equip to the tune of $9 billion that the rest of them want to fight, because that's fundamentally not true. Then he makes what I think is the devastating point. He says, this reinforced my decision that I'm right. The fact that it collapsed so quickly just reinforces my decision, because that means if we stayed 1 more year or 5 more years or 20 more years, it wouldn't have made any difference at all. Whenever we got out, no matter when it is, if the year was 2106 and we tried to get out, Afghanistan would have become Talibanistan instantly. Instantly. He says, how can you send somebody from the United States? How many more generations of our sons and daughters are you going to send to fight and die for somebody else's fight when a lot of people who are involved in that fight don't even want to take on the fight themselves? You going to send somebody from Arkansas? I mean, it's a joke. He says we spent $1 trillion, by the way, massive underestimate. We've already spent at least $2 trillion. When all said and done with Iraq and Afghanistan, it's going to be about $6.5 trillion. I've also read one figure in Business Insider, $7 trillion when all said and done. Now, the best criticism I've heard, and it's a criticism I mostly agree with, is, look, we had 88,000 interpreters, or not interpreters. We had, when you include the interpreters and their families and like our top close allies working hand in hand with the U.S. government, when you include them and their families, there's about 88,000 of them. And we were only able to get out like 2,000. And there's a 14-step process for these people to get into the country. I'm sorry, but you should have cut the red tape and you should have streamlined it and you should have got more of them over here. So I think that criticism is totally legit, that they were sort of blindsided and they were dragging their feet on that front. Now, Biden's response to that is, a lot of people are asking why we didn't evacuate sooner. Some of the people just didn't want to leave. And in fact, the government, this part I totally believe, that the Afghanistan government actually discouraged the U.S. for doing this mass exodus, because then it would have led to a crisis of confidence. And so they cared more about the optics. Hey, make sure everything looks cool. Make sure everything looks cool. And then, it was too little too late, effectively, when it fell. That actually reminds me a little bit of COVID. You know how like the strategy for a while with COVID was like, just be cool, nothing's happening, everything's fine, everything's cool. And then, eventually the shit hits the fan. Everybody's like, why didn't we have a plan? It's the exact same thing here, where I'm sure it's true that there were whispers behind the scenes of like, hey, we don't want to cause a crisis of confidence, don't get out like 88,000 people right this second. That's crazy. But now in retrospect, it looks like, well, you probably should have gotten them out of there. So I think both things are true. I think that Biden's side of the story is correct from his perspective, and that's exactly how he sees it. I just don't think that that's, the powerful argument in retrospect. I do think you could have gotten at least more than 2,000 of them out of there. You couldn't have got 15 or 20,000 of them out of there. Now, some people are saying, yeah, but we have had instances of like people who were nominally on our side who then ended up killing our soldiers. That's true, and we've covered those stories on this show. But that is so rare. And so you want to bring them all in and vet them appropriately? I'm fine with that, but you should have done more to bring them in. So that is a criticism. That's, I think, the biggest failure here is that. And then a lot of people are arguing he's pointing fingers at everybody else. I didn't hear any finger pointing there at all. In fact, he said, quote, "The buck stops with me." That's the opposite of finger pointing. That is, I accept full responsibility for what's going on right now. So I don't know how anybody can say that. Everybody's like, oh, he's blaming Trump. Go ahead, watch the whole speech. I dare you. There's one time he brings up Trump, and all he says, it's factual. He goes, I inherited a timeline from my predecessor to get out on May 1st. I had to decide whether or not to follow through with getting out or to basically recommit. Now, our agreement with the Taliban runs out, so violence is gonna spike drastically, and we're gonna be back to a hot war if I decided not to follow through, if I decided to stay in there. And so he was saying, I inherited the timeline, and I made this decision. I'm going to follow through with the overarching idea of getting out. That's not blaming Trump at all. That's just bringing up something factual. When people listen to this speech and take away that he's finger pointing, I can't help but think that these people are total idiots. I mean, they're just complete dupes to the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies and the deep state and the military-industrial complex. Like, how can you watch that speech and come to that conclusion? It makes no sense. And then, listen, Biden makes the comparison to Vietnam. Biden says, because everybody's been doing that on TV. Oh my God, this is like the fall of Saigon when we were with our helicopter getting people out. Yeah, but the takeaway from the Vietnam situation and Saigon was like, God damn it, this whole thing was a disaster. We should have never went in the first place. So why is everybody pretending like the takeaway now for Afghanistan is, oh my God, this withdrawal is so messed up. We should have either not done it or done it slower. By the way, you can't do it slower because the guns are hot very soon. So if you were to stay there longer, then all of a sudden casualties skyrocket, including U.S. casualties. So you can't take longer. So it's just amazing that everybody understands with Vietnam, the real takeaway was, oh my God, this is crazy. We should have never gone there. But now with Afghanistan, everybody's pretending like the lesson was the exact opposite. Now he even says to the Taliban, listen, we're just securing the airport and getting our people out. And if there's any aggression against us, we're unleashing hell on you. I agree with that point too. You got to let them know we're still the United States of America. And if you come after us while we're evacuating, it's a rap skis for you, son. And we'll stop at nothing and it'll get ugly real quick. You got to let him know just from a defensive perspective that that's what we're going to do. So I agree with him on that. Now, let me get to here's my overarching theory on this. And we're going to have more on this later as well. What the hell, why weren't the forces on the ground, and why wasn't leadership more orderly and on schedule and ready to get out? Why wasn't there a smoother drawdown? Well, listen, and I can't take credit for this theory. This is, Crystal told me this, and it just rang true immediately. Whether it was with Obama or with Trump previously, there were times where they were, clearly had the instinct of like, we got to get out. And every single time they expressed that instinct, what happened is the intelligence agencies or the Pentagon or both, you can call them the deep state, they spoke to them and basically talked them out of it. And we're like, yeah. No, here's why we're not going to do that. Here's what you don't understand. Here's what you're missing. And listen, when you have somebody with a nice pressed uniform with all the badges on them and the flags and, they look, as Trump would say, straight out of central casting, and they're telling you, no, here's what you don't understand. Here's why you're wrong about this. I'm the expert. You sit down and listen to me. You could talk these presidents out of convictions. Trump clearly, because he said this a zillion times on Twitter before he was even president about, we got to get out of Afghanistan. It's so stupid. Why are we there? And then he didn't do it. So even with his withdrawal, he still kept 2,000 troops there. So guys, you have to look at that. And what's Occam's razor? Occam's razor is somebody behind the scenes was pulling the strings and convinced them you're not going to do this. They absolutely thought the same thing when it came to Biden. That the same playbook that we used on Obama and that we used on Trump. Here's why you can't do that. Here's why we have to stay. And old Joe, give him credit, that curmudgeonly grandpa characteristic came out and he was like, disagree. We're getting out. And listen, he stuck to his guns and he put his middle fingers up and he said, I don't care. I don't agree with you. We shouldn't be there. Let's get out. And so they thought they could convince him, and they couldn't convince him. And so then here we are immediately. All of Afghanistan falls to the Taliban. And the reason why we weren't more prepared for it and didn't get out in a more orderly fashion and quicker is because to the last second, they probably thought they could convince Joe to change his mind. And so that's why you see chaos on the ground. That's why you see we're in a mad dash to get out of there, and we haven't evacuated nearly enough people. So in a sense, you could say U.S. intelligence and the Pentagon, military-industrial complex, sort of sabotaged Biden, where they really thought, no, we're good, we're going to stay there. And so everything was sort of operating as per usual on the ground, but Biden stuck to his guns and said, get out. And so you didn't have the plans that should have been in effect yet. So that's I think that there might be some truth to that. Now, granted, that's all speculation, but it really is the best explanation as to why we weren't more prepared. And then the other thing is, and again, more on this later, it's possible he was told one thing, and then when this happened, it's like they wanted to make him look like an idiot. Oh, sir, it's okay. it's going to fall maybe in 90 days. Afghanistan will fall. Like, the intelligence he was being fed. Now, by the way, they're coming out now, the CIA, and everybody's coming out and saying, no, we warned him, we told him this would happen, he didn't listen. My guess is they may have thought this was going to happen, but they said to him, oh, sir, 90 days, maybe a year, something, but we do have time. And that made him look like an idiot when everything fell immediately, which further bolsters their case of like, oh, see, I told you we shouldn't have gotten out. So, I mean, listen, I know it sounds crazy because Joe is the deepest establishment politician of all time when you go to his voting record, but this is one area where he happens to be right, and now holy hell is raining down on him. So I really think it's brave. The only thing that I would have done differently, like I said, is tried to get out those 88,000 sooner. But again, if I'm in his position and I'm being fed the same intelligence he's being fed, maybe I also think, no, I have some time to do it, so maybe I wouldn't have done it yet. So you never know because you're not in the room. But ultimately, he made the correct decision. And the military-industrial complex is flipping out, which is why you see all of elite media is going nuts, whether it's the Democratic apologists or the Republican apologists. And the leadership of both parties are going nuts, and they're going after him viciously. And by the way, the propaganda is so thick and so deep and so overwhelming that now his approval rating is dropping. So I do think that in time, history will judge this the way it should be judged, which is like, of course we should have gotten out of there. But right now, because of the propaganda, his approval is plummeting. And it seems like he has no allies left, because he doesn't, because he actually is doing something brave here, and he's actually standing up to the entire military-industrial complex. So, listen, you got to give credit where it's due. We can nitpick, but at the end of the day, guys, listen, at the end of the day, the process criticisms come down to what? We should have stayed longer. That's what the process criticisms are. And even that, I think, is totally incorrect. Some people are being honest and open, and they're admitting, I want to stay there forever. Okay, congratulations on taking your phenomenally unpopular position. Some people are being honest and admitting that, the real neocons and the real hardcore imperialists. And then others, like a lot of liberal interventionists, are making the argument of, we should have stayed longer. Yeah, okay, withdraw, but don't withdraw like this. But if this was going to happen whenever we left, if Kabul was going to fall, which it was going to, and Afghanistan was going to become Talibanistan no matter what, then you can make that argument at any point. If we got out in 2033, let's say, they would have been saying the same thing. Jake Tapper would be on TV saying, I'm fine with withdrawing, but not like this. So fundamentally, at the end of the day, you have soft imperialists and hard imperialists, and those are the people who are lined up against Biden on this front. And it makes me think, what Biden's doing here makes me think he actually bought the cover story. Namely that, like, oh, the reason we're there is for freedom and democracy and women's rights and to get back the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11, and that's it. He actually bought that cover story, I think, because maybe naively, he never considered, well, the military-industrial complex is making a phenomenal amount of money. Again, more on that later. Trillions of dollars of mineral wealth in Afghanistan is there. Opium is there. In Iraq, oil. And, of course, there's the geopolitics of it, where we're trying to keep China and Russia at bay. It looks like he bought the cover story, and he sees through the cover story, and he knows it's bullshit, so he's like, let's just get out. But as Sean McCarthy says on Twitter, great follow, I highly recommend you guys follow him, he says, geez, Biden is really working overtime to make it 2 out of 2 Catholic presidents assassinated. Obviously a reference to JFK being the first Catholic president, and he was killed possibly by the CIA, if not likely by the CIA. And Sean McCarthy's like, Biden is trying to make it 2 for 2. So this is the best thing Biden's done. And there are criticisms I have, but he's correct on the overarching point. And it's amazing how many people who even nominally thought of themselves as like, I'm against the forever wars, now they're flipping on Biden. And now all of a sudden they're not against the forever wars. And we should have stayed just a little bit longer. How much longer? And what would have changed? So he's right, and more than happy to give credit where it's due. And as I joked around on Twitter and said, if he also gets us out of Iraq, I will offer him my services as White House press secretary. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.